I'm a one-woman show here, so I'm trying to make sure we're recording, we're live, everything is going okay. So let's see.
Yes, we are live on YouTube. That's exciting.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Hello, Sonia. Oh, that's a nice name. Hi, Lynette. Lynette is the immediate past president of NAMIC Atlanta. Thank you for joining us, Lynette. So nice to see you. I think we're all set here.
Lots of folks trickling into the building. I see it's 49 people here so far, so we're halfway there.
Yes, we're there. Just give it one more minute and then we will get started. I'm still trying to do the mechanics. Okay, now we're good. Okay. I need some help, folks. I need some help.
You are doing a great job, Radia.
Thank you. I appreciate you, Crystal, so much. Okay, it is 12:05. Thank you, everybody. I am so excited this afternoon to have this fantastic panel. As you can see, we have a full panel. We have a full house. NAMIC New York has partnered with two great organizations, well, actually three great organizations. So I just want to thank everyone for joining today. This is going to be a fantastic discussion. My name is Radia Barnes, for those who don't know me. I'm the president of the New York chapter of NAMIC New York. And I just want to say hello to my members, friends of NAMIC, and any newcomers that might have joined us today. NAMIC is the National Association for Multi-Ethnicity and Communication. We're the leading diversity organization for people of color in the communications industry. We produce events such as this monthly, as well as workshops, fireside chats, networking events, and we also have leadership development and mentoring programs. I'll drop my website link in the chat for those who want to learn more information about NAMIC. I'm really excited for today's event. With everything that's going on in the world, we know it has just been so much going on. Discussions such as this are vital for growth, understanding, and to help create change. I want to thank the panelists and the moderator, the wonderful Crystal Berger, for participating today. And I'll now hand it over to Penn Peddleton, the co-founder of CLP Strategies.
Thank you, Radia. We're very proud to work with NAMIC here. You guys have been on the forefront of promoting racial equity in this industry for many years. And so I want to please urge everyone on the call to send your questions for the panelists to Radia during the discussion. And I also am very pleased that Crystal Berger is our moderator. She is also the newest consulting partner at CLP. Crystal has worked at Fox News for a decade, at least, and she hosts programs on Clubhouse and other broadcast media, and has now started her own very exciting startup, which is offering tools to automate news production and enterprise broadcasting. So it's great to have Crystal on board and in charge. Let me briefly set the stage for our panel. This is a discussion about how we communicate, and in particular, how corporate leaders can communicate commitment to racial equity. You know, surveys show that the public increasingly believes that corporations are best positioned as leaders of social change. But at the same time, it can be difficult to find common ground in today's society. PR and communications professionals, however, are uniquely qualified, we think, to help business leaders communicate with conviction and push genuine action forward. We put this panel together to help you address the uncertainty and the perceived business risks of joining the national conversation about racial equity. Our goal is to help identify communications opportunities and the strategies to make those missions meaningful to the public. I'll turn this over to Crystal.
Thank you so much, Penn. I am honored to be the moderator for today's panel. Radia, thank you as always for hosting such meaningful content on the NAMIC New York platform. And welcome everyone. So get your pens, get ready to drop your comments in the chat as we're going to have a very spirited and in-depth conversation with our panelists, who I will now introduce. Up first, we have Roman Oben, who is the Vice President of Football Development for the NFL, where he drives messaging, builds platforms, and works as the NFL's liaison for football organizations, partners, and all 32 of the NFL's teams. During his NFL career, Roman completed his master's degree in public administration and created internships and job shadowing opportunities for current players to maximize their time off of the field. He currently serves on the boards of the Sports Fitness Industry Association, Minorities in Sports, and the Positive Coaching Alliance. Everyone, please drop some claps in the chat for Roman Oben. Roman, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Crystal.
You're welcome. Up next is Ray Paleckia. He is the Senior Director of Strategic Communications at FINRA, the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. Ray has more than 30 years of experience in corporate communications at the New York Stock Exchange and at FINRA. He served on the diversity councils of those organizations for more than 15 years, and he is committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Ray, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you all for putting this together.
Yes, thank you. And last but not least at all is Carmela Glover. She is the president of the Diversity Action Alliance, and she's also the director of the Diversity Equity Inclusion Program at Page. She spent a decade as a chemical engineer and supply chain expert for drug and cosmetic companies, including Johnson & Johnson, Procter & Gamble, and L'Oreal USA. Oftentimes the only female engineer and Black leader in a room full of decision makers, the career transition into DEI and communications was very purpose-driven for Carmela. It started when she became the first executive director of the PRSA Foundation, which is a diversity-focused charitable organization committed to promoting diversity among PR professionals. And with such an amazingly eclectic background, we welcome Carmela Glover.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you, Carmela. So we're going to just jump right in it, guys. Please throw your questions in the chat. Radia will be gracefully fielding them to me throughout the conversation for those who want to be engaged in the convo. We'll start with Roman. So Roman, what are some of the things that you see that the NFL has done right when we speak of communicating racial equity to the masses?
Thanks for that question. I think the first thing I would say is I've been at the league office for 6 years now, and I came in 2014, really at the end of the Ray Rice incident and that discussion on domestic violence, and I think, and obviously everyone knows that we've seen the National Football League and their communities. That's all 32 teams are communities, players and legends alike. Really just address these polarizing issues in terms of what is the NFL doing about it? Because when you're a national league and you're on television and you have a lot of players that have a lot of public personas, I think it allows you to address certain areas equally. So when we look at what's happened, obviously last year was a unique year with the pandemic and all the the racial issues in this country really coming to a boil. I just would say that the NFL has done a lot of just social justice initiatives, probably starting about 5 or 6 years ago, that more specifically addressed players, teams, team leaders. So I'll just read this off. The 3 core areas were, education, economic advancement, community and police relations, again, going back to 2015, 2016 or so, and then criminal justice reform. So, yes, there have been checks written in communities, and yes, there's been a lot of things done. But it's also important that the players and the communities can define that in their own way. You have a lot of players that are from, Jackson, Mississippi, but they play for the Green Bay Packers. So a lot of players have a responsibility to the communities that they come from and some of the issues they're dealing with back home. And then obviously in the communities that they play in, because the team's ownership, if you will, wants to address those issues. The second thing I would say, and this has been longstanding as well, is that we have a lot of HBCU initiatives. So when you talk about, just racial equity, it comes with equality and opportunity. And so while some of these small institutions of higher learning are often overshadows, really that wealth of talent still continues to meet like the highest standards of character. I mean, a lot of historical institutions, HBCUs. So we have Battle of the Brains competitions, really a technology platform, obviously taking off the Battle of the Bands, the pun, if you will. Experientships, careers in football forums. So really gathering students that want to work in sports management, sports administration, hearing from team ownership, general managers, like what does it take to work in the sports business? I know a lot of universities are monetizing the sports management degree, but what does it mean on the back end? What does it mean? I mean, there's only 4 or 5 major leagues. There's only 30 teams or so in every league. Everyone's not going to work for a team or a league or a club, but there's technology. There's a lot of different opportunities, but I think if we don't equal the opportunity and get the information, then we won't, the old saying, when we know better, we do better. And so I think the NFL has had to learn and do better so that we can all be better. It's not a perfect science by any means, and it comes with a lot of criticism. But I've learned in my career and my experiences that you're really only as successful as a criticism that you get from making unpopular decisions. Things can trend and be tweeting and all that, but you just have to feel good about the things that you are doing. So I'm really proud that I played in the 90s to the late early 2000s. I played from 96 to 2008 as a professional football player, but it's good to see that athletes now have a bigger voice, are doing a lot in their communities, and that's being encouraged. That wasn't always encouraged. And so we want to make sure that we're defining that in our own way. And so I know it's a long, unabridged answer to your question, but there's still a lot of work to be done, but I feel good about the direction things are going in now, even despite all the national criticism that has caused these things to come to a boil.
Yes, and I definitely want to engage Ray and Carmela in this question because you both have a very unique perspective and outlook from the outside. So if there's one thing, Ray or Carmela, whoever would like to take the question, what's one thing that you see that the NFL has done well when communicating racial equity?
For me, from my personal opinion, what I've seen that the NFL has done well in communicating is what we would like to see corporations do. And that's to go back and acknowledge the gaps and acknowledge them publicly. And that way you're not only holding yourself accountable, but that court of public opinion, that can be very crucial, right? So the fact that the commissioner has gone back and said, you know what, we've made a mistake. We should have done this better. That is a model. That's a key exemplar of what we would like to see corporations do. You're not always going to get it right. That's part of the journey. And the NFL has shown that it's important to them to not only resonate with their their fans, but to their all their key stakeholders, including the players, including the communities that they're working in. And they do it really well. It's just about communicating that and understanding that in their learning journey as a very public organization, there are going to be smaller organizations who are never seen, but who learn from those mistakes, and that's critical. And it's nice to see an organization that's willing to take that risk, because it's actually helpful to the greater good. There's plenty of other major sports leagues that might not necessarily do the same thing. So the NFL is definitely a thought leader here.
Thank you, Carmela. And I love what you said about there'll be plenty of unseen organizations that will be able to implement some of the things that they've seen the NFL do well. Thank you so much for adding to that question. Now, Roman, there is a thing that exists called the Rooney Rule. We would love for you to dive into what that is and talk about how that has impacted DEI initiatives in other areas.
I think we all know that the league is 70% people of 75% people of color, 70% African American, but ownership, management, head coaches are a small number. And so the Rooney Rule was established just as a part of overall diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy to equal out the interview process. I think if people don't get interviews, they don't get seen in front of ownership. And the irony that Mike Tomlin, who we're the same age, he got the job for the Steelers by 2005, and he was like 35 years old. Had he not been presented and gotten that chance and he's one of the greatest coaches in the last 20 years. And so the Rooney Rule has evolved. So you have to make sure you interview a minority candidate. So that's, Black, brown, other. You have to interview a minority candidate, and it's now head coaches, general managers, front office positions, coordinator positions, and then senior level league and club positions. It's evolved into now making sure it's a written job description for every position. And then sometimes in certain cases, if Crystal Berger is an offensive coordinator, you may not get a permission to even interview for another job. And that's what you saw in the old days, a lot of recycling of the head coaches. So coach gets fired, 2 days, he gets hired somewhere else at another head coach, but you don't see the coordinators moving up. And so Bruce Arians, actually, who's really been a champion for hiring a lot of people of color, minorities, female coaches, he's often said, just from a football standpoint, you need African-American offensive coordinators. You need quarterback coaches, because it's such an offensive-driven league that's where it starts. So that's including colleges. Colleges aren't off the hooks. University presidents and athletic directors need to see the people of color, the face of their universities, the face of their organizations, not just the talent in the locker room on the field, if you will. So again, it's not a perfect science, but we've seen, I don't think there were like one African-American general manager, or 3 this year. Head coaches tend to change every year. There's 4 or 5 new head coaches. So there's been upwards of 7 coaches in 1 year, but then within 2 or 3 years, they get fired, something happens, they leave their position, then you see other coaches come in. So, but I've seen the Rooney Rule impact the way other leagues and other companies have created policies. So the joke is we take it on the chin and then everyone else adjusts without the public scrutiny, if you will. So, but it's good to see. If you guys ever can go back and watch Tony Dungy's Hall of Fame speech, he talked about how there were like less than a handful of African-American just coaches, position coaches, not to mention head coaches. And then by the time he made his Hall of Fame speech, there were probably half a dozen African-American coaches. There's more general managers now. I still want to see African-American front office, athletic directors. You talk about Kevin Warren, who came from the Minnesota Vikings. He's now the conference commissioner of the Big Ten. And so we just want to see not to just Black people placed in certain positions, but people that are definitely deserving of those opportunities, because they definitely have a good body of work and have led organizations and been successful across the board.
Now, Ray, I do want to tag this to you in discussing the Rooney Rule and how these practices have been in place with the NFL. Ray, what do you think Wall Street could do to encourage these types of policies to be implemented within their corporate structures?
Well, I know from our experience at FINRA that our goal is for every panel of candidates for a promotion or hiring, that at least half that panel needs to be women or people of color. And the research shows that that's where you begin to make a difference in who actually gets that position. Not if you just have one person on a panel, doesn't make that much of a difference. If you've got at least half the panel representing women or people of color, that's where you begin to make progress and in diversifying your roster. So I think that there's increasing recognition that that's the case, and companies can strive for doing better. If you look at the numbers in any organization, they're probably not where that organization wants them to be. By changing your practices, you begin to change things for the better. And you can publish your numbers internally and or externally, and hold them out as a measure of accountability, and also in the same breath, talk about the things you're doing to diversify the pools from which you're drawing people. The organizations you're reaching out to, which may be different from either the professional organizations or the colleges where you used to recruit. Those are things that really begin to make a difference. And I think I'm beginning to see them more and more, not just at our organization, but others as well.
So for our leaders who are tuned in and you're trying to figure out how to incorporate some of these practices, I love what Ray just mentioned, create a panel or encourage your leadership to create a panel that is half diverse leaders. And then that way you can begin to communicate the full story of what the organization wants to accomplish as it pertains to diversity. Thank you so much, Ray. Now back to you, Ro. Many pro athletes are tackling this national discussion around Black equity and racism. In your experience working with lots of players and corporate leaders within the space, how has this been a burden for some athletes and then a benefit to others?
So I'll answer two questions. Someone did ask about a question about what Doug Williams said about HBCU students, HBCU athletes not being drafted. So let me address that first real quickly. There are every year about 450 players that are evaluated every year to be drafted. There are 350 that would be invited to the scouting combine where you see an Indy running the 40s and stuff like that. 259 players get drafted. So I would say sometimes, and I have a lot of respect for Doug Williams and Walter Payton and those traditional HBCU. There was a lot of HBCU athletes in the NFL in the 60s and 70s. What started happening is, you guys know, that the Alabamas, LSUs saw the value of African Americans on there. If you look at the old Alabama LSU football team in the 60s, it's a pretty white team. That changed over time. But one of the things that also has changed is, let's say in the state of Florida, for example, athletes that would have gone to Bethune-Cookman or FAMU are now going to Central Florida. You look at what UCF is doing. You look at FIU, FAU. It's not just Miami, Florida, Florida State. A lot of these other schools are building stadiums, building infrastructure, are building things that attract recruits. So yes, Alabama and some of these schools are up here because they get a lot of talent and they're promising these kids they can come through and get drafted. But also, are you creating a better option than Louisiana Lafayette, South Dakota State, if you're from Detroit? I mean, I think HBCUs, I grew up in Howard University's backyard in DC. And so I think we also have to make sure as parents and leaders that we teach the value of an HBCU education to the kids. And it's not just about recruiting and the splash. So yes, I agree. Talented people do come from HBCUs, and historically they do. The year before I got drafted, Steve McNair, I think, was at number 4, number 5 pick in the draft. Does a Steve McNair coming out of high school now go to a Southern or a Grambling, or does he go to Alabama or LSU? That's on recruiting. That's on parent. That's on everyone. Everyone has to take responsibility in that. So when you look at 4 or 5 Sun Belt Conference students got drafted, 3 people from Conference USA got drafted. So it's really starting to become top heavy, SEC, Big Ten, Pac-10 in terms of where the athletes are coming from. But I would say, yes, HBCU students are strong students, strong culture, strong experience, but we have to make sure we're teaching them the value of that, and that everyone's responsible for that. And to your other question, I've come through I always say the shut up and dribble era, where you had to show up, play football, and you weren't allowed to show anything else that you were important in. That was important to you. I remember working out in the off season, getting dressed in my car, putting on my khakis and my golf shirt to do my internship, because I didn't want coaches. This is in the 90s. I didn't want coaches to think other things were more important to me than football. But that era is long gone. I think when you talk about Black equity and racism, if you don't show players that you value what's important to them, you won't have a good locker room. You won't have a good organization. All these things, Crystal and Ray, and you guys know this, there's been an increased awareness of just cultural sensitivity, racial sensitivity. Anybody in any organization, you better make sure, if it's bring your dog to work day or whatever that is, like whatever's important to them, you have to make sure it's important to that organization, or else you won't have a good, healthy organization. And it's great to see the things. I love what the NBA guys are doing. Obviously, smaller organization, 10 guys per team. They're always on TV. They have no helmets on, obviously. But it's good to see what players are doing now, because now it's every athlete walks into the league. I have a brand. I have a deeper sense of responsibility to my community where I grew up. I know where I'm from, and I'm going to represent that. My cause, my cleats. You're allowed to amplify what's important to you, and I think it's better than it's ever been. Now, are there some parts of our country and there's certain areas that say, well, we don't want athletes diving into these political issues, and I watch football to get away from that? Yes, that's true. But if we're not aware of what's going on around us, then we're all failing, honestly. And and it's race, but it's also everything. Again, cultural sensitivity, racial sensitivity. I'm seeing HR trainings across the board that didn't exist 10 years ago. So we all have to make sure that we're evolving as the world evolves.
Mm. Thank you so much, Ro, for addressing the HBCU question as well. As an HBCU graduate, I think another piece of that communication to even have younger athletes who are extremely talented, even aware of HBCU initiatives and opportunities, is that we have to look at the funding and support our HBCUs as well, so they can actually compete with the Big Ten schools. So thank you, Roman, for that. Now we're going to move the conversation from sports more to the financial world. Ray, what advice would you give Black undergraduates who intend on pursuing a career on Wall Street, strategies to actually going into those spaces? Because as we know, Wall Street has for a very long time been a all white male dominated industry.
One thing that graduates can do is, if they're really intent on going into finance and they want to signal to a brokerage firm, let's say, that they're serious about that career path, they can take an entrance exam, which is a general exam. It's called the Securities Industry Essentials exam that we now administer. And it's a test of general financial knowledge. You don't have to be working in the industry to take it. It's open to anybody, and it's inexpensive. It used to be that you needed to be working in the industry first before you began your credentialing processes effectively. So there's that initial step that you could take as a signal to prospective employers that you're serious about this, that this is what you want to explore with them. Secondly, I would talk about the network that everybody creates for themselves, and to make the greatest use of that. Your jobs are going to, in general, over the course of your career, come from your network. So start with where you are in college, in any community groups that you're involved with. Work that network. Keep in touch with people, professors, guidance counselors, the college recruiting office, and the folks at any internship that you do in any business at all. Keep in touch with those people, work those relationships, people who are interested in work with those, and work your way into positioning yourself to enter the field that you want to.
Thank you, Ray. Carmela, I would love for you to expound on this, because one thing that Ray just said that is very, very important is, I always say your network determines your net worth, but more oftentimes than not, people of color may not have access to those networks. And so what are some things that financial corporations could do to help students actually expand those networks, to encourage them to even look at jobs on Wall Street?
What I've seen done that works really well, I would consider it a best practice, is organizations who will build a meaningful relationship with HBCUs, specifically for entry-level talent, right? Not only for their alumni houses, but for the current students that they have. Build a relationship with them that includes internships and providing grants and scholarships and experiences, as Roman shared. The other thing that I really like to see organizations do is make sure their internships are paid, and it's still very common right now that internships are unpaid. But making sure you're reaching out to those networks, and not just in the HBCU world, but outside of HBCUs, you've got people who are members of Black Greek letter organizations who are mid to senior level professionals. So when you're looking for more than just entry level professionals, you've got entire networks of professionals of color. And there are historically Hispanic Greek letter organizations as well. There's plenty of affinity organizations that are similar to NAMIC, right? There's ColorCom. I mean, in every industry, you can find a affinity group for everyone in the BIPOC spectrum. I've seen, particularly, I can say in the financial sector, I've seen JP Morgan Chase do this, where they are building relationships, not just with HBCUs, but with Alpha Kappa Alpha. So I'm a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha. And at every conference I've been to, JP Morgan Chase has had a booth and they're hiring and they're looking for Black talent. And who knows how many other, affinity organizations they're reaching out to do that. So that's a good way to diversify your talent pool and to find talent who's not just because they're people of color, but because they are good talent. They have good value add. And I say that because someone actually asked a question in the chat, why HR doesn't look to hire minorities when they clearly see that there's a gap. And what I would say is there's a federal law, Title VII, that says you cannot discriminate against someone based on their race, religion, sex, creed. And what many HR professionals, especially if they're junior professionals, read that federal law as, I can't hire someone just because they're Black. And I think the missing education piece here is that you're not putting out a job description that says, I'm looking for a person of color. You're putting out a job description that says, I'm looking for someone who's familiar with good accounting principles, or the general accounting principles. And I'm looking for someone who has experience in Excel. And none of those things say I'm looking for a person of color. But when you employ policies in your organization that are similar to the Rooney Rule, and you have a diverse candidate pool, you're looking for all the same qualities, not just their color. And so you're not violating. The EEOC allows for you to make amends to make sure that your organization is diverse without breaking the federal law that says you can't discriminate and say, I can't hire you because we're looking for a person of color and you're white. And so I think that's where a lot of that comes from, to answer that question too.
Thank you, Carmela, for mentioning
Hey, Crystal,
that.
Crystal, I just wanted to add something I forgot earlier, and just to add to Carmela's good answer. And that is to not overlook the regulatory side of the business and the compliance side of the business, which are large. And every firm on the street has a large and growing compliance program. So FINRA is hiring, so is the SEC, CFTC, and firms are hiring to help themselves comply with all the federal and self-regulatory rules and regulations. It's a great place to start. It's a great place to grow your skills and knowledge and position yourself for a great career.
Now, Ray, you've had an amazing 30-year career in your space. And as a senior director, you've taken on the charge of actually writing about these different issues and being a true advocate within your organization. So could you share with those who may be in a senior level position or maybe even in a C-suite position, how to communicate this type of advocacy and support on a granular level within your organization and without?
I think as communicators, the thing we often overlook is the most basic communication skill, which is to listen. And at that listening comes understanding and kind of a common resolve to move things forward. I know myself, I had very limited experience with minorities growing up. Grew up in a largely white neighborhood in a largely white town. And it wasn't until college and getting into my professional career that my network began to diversify, and I began to learn more that not everybody has the same experience, the same advantages that I had growing up and working. One of the most effective things that I've seen my own organization do in the last couple of years has been to convene what we call courageous conversations. And one of our, in the wake of George Floyd's murder, one of our business leaders took it upon herself to put together a virtual panel of Black men who work in our organization and talk about their experiences at work and in their community. And then that was followed up with a panel of Black women. Recently, our Asian Employee Resource Group put together a group of Asian employees to talk about their experiences in the community. And although I've been involved in diversity for, as you said, over 15 years, the stories I heard were completely new to me. I had never heard a lot of these experiences. I gained a greater understanding of what people are up against, both in the workplace and coming to and from work, with their families, their experiences in the community. These are things that people cannot leave at the door when they come in at 9, or pick up, just pick up when they leave the door at the end of the day. They bring it to the office, and we've got to understand that. By having these courageous conversations, people who are white and male, people who are in power generally, will begin to understand what the folks who are their trusted colleagues working right across the hall from them, what those people are up against these days. And again, I would hope that out of that understanding comes a greater resolve to take positive action. As communicators, we can put together those conversations. That's a skill that we have. We have the skill to listen for, and the affinity to listen for voices that haven't been heard before, and to put those voices in a room and create some understanding out of that. I think that's where it can begin.
And I love what you said about the organizations being willing to take the risk and actually host and have those courageous conversations. Roman, I do want to quickly tag to you on that. What is the unique attribute about the NFL that really prompts them to lead the charge in a lot of these conversations?
Well, I think you have to. I think when you're the number one sports league, and you're the number one, I mean, the 7th round pick of the draft was like, had more television views than Game 7 of like a hockey championship or something like that. And so if we're not responsible, then people will let us know. And I think we, and sometimes, like, that's why I said earlier that sometimes a lot of the criticism of not addressing things earlier, or of some of the things that are really public, it forces you to act earlier and sooner than everyone else, because because we have to do it. So, but again, when Ray, you talked about, you have to listen to your constituents, you have to listen to your organization. It starts with that, because then you can understand and then try to drive some solutions after that.
Thank you, Roman. Now, speaking out, last summer, the Wall Street Journal ran a story headlined, "Wall Street knows it's too white and fixing it will be hard." And then in March, the Journal ran, "Minority-owned investment banks are underwriting more corporate bond offerings." So, Ray, how do these kinds of headlines actually influence leaders to speak out and not be afraid to talk about racial inequity?
Well, I'd like to think that what they take from it is that understanding that they need to change. Roman's right. It's not easy. It is difficult. We've got a lot of baked in history to get to where we are today. A lot of history to overcome, and at the same time, what we've got in finance is a great opportunity. So you've got this wealthy industry. You've got the ability to invest in organizations that can productively move the ball forward in their communities. You've got hundreds of thousands of people in the industry, and to continue to go with the old mindset of, well, the corporate bankers that we're pitching our investment banking proposal to are largely white, or the investors that we're proposing our investment ideas to as financial advisors are largely white and male. We need to move past that. We need to recognize that the rest of the country has diversified a lot faster and to a greater extent than Wall Street has. So Wall Street doesn't want to be behind that curve. And as communicators, we don't want to be behind that curve, trying to defend an organization that the world is passing by. Instead, you want to be ahead of the curve. You want to be leading the effort to create a very open and inclusive economy, one where there's greater opportunity, one where banks are investing productively in the development of communities that have been left behind in the past. So when you see Ariel Investments doing what it has done to support financially minority-owned businesses, and then JP Morgan getting behind that effort financially, you begin to see the story that I think Wall Street is moving toward telling finally.
Thank you, Ray. And just to bring in some statistics that Penn shared with us earlier today, board diversity disclosure demands have been announced by NASDAQ, Oben, and State Street. 30% of companies are now disclosing pay equity of employees. Amazon has committed to doubling the portion of Black senior directors to 8% in 2021. And so there are some strides that are happening, and these are some things that we can bring back to our leadership and communicating equity across the board. Now I'll go to Carmela. Some say that today's corporate racial reckoning is just a superficial woke capitalism that others may call the civil rights 3.0. So comparing it to the civil rights movement of the 1960s, how do you perceive what's happening in sports, on Wall Street, and in other industries?
I definitely see some parallels, and parallels from the standpoint that we are seeing for the first time, I think, since the civil rights era, laws being enacted, on a government level. So, Biden just signed in a law that supports the AAPI community, and this is the first time we're seeing civil rights in that way. The other congruence that I'm seeing is the uprising, I'll say, of people of color, right? And in a very constructive way. So a lot of what we see in the media is the riots and things like that. But right now, for example, entrepreneurism is up. It's up like 70%, which is a lot. And what that means is that we're seeing a lot more of the BIPOC community becoming a part of the economy and kind of taking back their power. And it reminds me not just of the civil rights era, but back in 1921 in Tulsa, Oklahoma, when you had that community, that Black community of what they called the Black Wall Street at that time. And it was a very affluent community. And I'm starting to see that pervasively across, not even just in the US, but also in London and the UK. We're seeing kind of this desire for self-sufficiency from an economic standpoint. I think organizations specifically in the financial sector can take advantage of that and be a part of the growth of minority communities in that way. So I would say there's definitely a lot of parallels between the civil rights era, but even prior to that, there's so much that's happening and that has happened uniquely and untimely, the death of George Floyd, but it was at a time where empathy was really high because as a human race, we're all losing people to COVID-19. We're all at home and kind of glued to the TV. There's a lot we can no longer ignore, and what other folks may have previously turned a blind eye to, or just not really truly not been aware of. We were on pause as a globe, and our empathy was high because we're all experiencing the same thing. We're all experiencing loss of friends, of family. We're all afraid of this COVID-19, which doesn't care about what color you are or how much money you make. And because we're there, we're at a point in time where we can reach across the table and come together. It's a really good opportunity for communicators to kind of dismantle that hyperpolarization that's happening right now, because we can come together as humans. As communicators, we change hearts, minds, and behaviors. And if we focus on that very human part of us, as opposed to, what makes us different, I think we're going to start to see more of these federal laws coming into place. And I love what NASDAQ is doing. I'm crossing my fingers for the response over the summer from the SEC proposal. So, I would say that it's very much like history, but the fact that we're living in it is really exciting.
And Carmela, also coupled with that empathy is also the accountability factor that we're seeing today because of everyone's awareness. And more companies have agreed to release their EEOC numbers. And a lot of those numbers really aren't impressive. And so for those leaders who are here that need to communicate those numbers to the public, what is your recommendation on how they can position and articulate those numbers to the public?
I don't think it'll be a surprise. And I think this is what companies need to stand courageous in. It's unfortunate and they don't look great, but I don't think it would be a surprise to anybody, any of your stakeholders, what your numbers are. We're looking at that across industries, across all of corporate America. The numbers don't look great. What you can couple your transparency with is, here's what we are doing, not what we plan to do. Because I think the good intentions have been around for decades. Not here's what we plan to do. Or if you're going to announce, here's what we plan to do, also here's what we're doing. Communicating it internally first. Because as leaders, sometimes, especially up in the C-suite, we get excited about these good efforts. We know it's great for social justice and we want to communicate it externally, and haven't yet got the buy-in of, our employee base. And so taking immediate actions that, for example, if your bylaws don't allow for you to do something, it's time for agility at this point. I mean, we've seen that our companies have been able to adapt to things like having to move our entire workforces in 3 days from working in the office to work from home. If we can have that level of agility on a global supply chain level for our organizations, we can have that in the bylaws when we're deciding to make decisions about, can we hire a person of color into our board or into our C-suite? If your bylaws say that you need to wait 6 months and vet someone and they have to have X, Y, and Z experiences, change the bylaws. And I've seen a lot of organizations who will call on their bylaws, but then nobody can find the most recent copy. And you know what I mean? There's so many excuses, I think, and not to be kitschy and channel Nike, but organizations who really want to get something done, and they can find immediate actions in their policies, and they will just do it. They literally will.
Yeah, Carmela, I agree with that. I think to your point, we can't live as senior level, like you can't live for the press release and the excitement about what we just announced. If by the time that press release gets to the employees, they're like, what does this mean? How does this affect us? If you don't have the employee buy-in, it doesn't matter what you announce, especially if it's like a large dollar amount, if you will, over donation. Everyone writes a check, but like, what are you actually doing in terms of changing policy? And I agree with that 100%.
Thank you, Roman. What I would like to do before we close out our panel, because we are running short on time, for each of our panelists that are here with us today, if there's just one piece of advice that you would give to our audience on how they can truly and authentically communicate a commitment to equity, what would be that one thing from Roman, Ray, and Carmela?
I guess if I would go first, I would say just work to demand accountability for your organization, even if it's a small cluster group, affinity groups. A lot of organizations doing that now. We have Ben Network, Black Engagement Network, we have Pride Network, we have a lot of different affinity groups, and then demand accountability for yourself. I would say it's easy to go on Clubhouse and complain for 2 hours, or it's easy to tweet something, but if you're not actively maximizing your time volunteering at an organization, and making improvements in whatever small area you can, then we're being hypocrites. So just be accountable and then demand accountability from your employers as well.
I would agree. And then just to expand upon that, I mean, being courageous, it takes a lot to do that in an organization where the culture may not necessarily be where it needs to be. In order for these agile and radical changes to happen, somebody has to speak up, as particularly those who are in a position of influence and a position of power, using your voice to maybe, go against the grain, challenge the status quo, just really being courageous and transparent, because you don't know what you don't know. And it's a lot more refreshing to hear someone say, I'm not sure, let's bring a diverse perspective in. So really just being yourself in that way.
And I would those are great responses. And I think the only thing you left for me to add is that we should not leave it to somebody else to move the ball forward. We need to do it ourselves. Don't leave it to another department. Just because you're in communications doesn't mean you can't convene those conversations that Carmela was just mentioning. We traditionally, I think, in corporate communications looked at it as kind of covering the rest of the organization, writing those press releases, putting out those emails to employees. Instead, look at it as being part of this program, part of this strategic effort to create a more open and inclusive environment. So join that diversity council, join those employee resource groups, get in the game. Don't just watch the game, get in the game.
Yeah,
I agree. Right. I think that I'm sorry to interrupt, Crystal. I just want to make the final point. There's a question in the chat about who should be leading the courageous conversations. And I think it goes right to what Ray said. We shouldn't depend on other functions to get this done. One, it's a collaborative effort, but I think uniquely as communicators, again, we have the ability to translate and to intercede and to dispel misinformation and myths. And so in those courageous conversations and in those safe spaces, you're going to uncover and discover fears that employees have, And it's not just the job of the chief diversity officer or the chief HR officer to make sure that we have diverse talent and diverse messages. It's a collaborative effort, but certainly as communicators, we should be setting the pace there.
Yes, absolutely, Carmela. Thank you for adding that. And I will just tag on the behalf of CLP Strategies and NAMIC New York before we open up the floor to questioning. My favorite quote is, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." And the purpose of this panel, the purpose of the work that we do, is to face that courageously, like Carmela, Ray, and Roman have all mentioned throughout this conversation. So for the last few minutes of our panel, we will open up the floor to questions. Radia will jump back in and we'll have our final words from Pim Pendleton on behalf of CLP Strategies. For those of you who have to chime out at 1 p.m., we thank you again for joining us. And for the panelists who can stay with us, please stay on to address some of the questions if you have time. And we thank you all so much for joining us here today.
Yes, such a great conversation. So these questions are going to be a little bit all over the place. So I'll just direct, whoever wants to take them, feel free. Someone asked, what's the difference between an experience-ship and a traditional internship?
In our case, an internship is more traditional, 10 weeks, summer, college student, if you will. An experience-ship is using 6, 7 HBCU students during draft week, using TSU students specifically in Nashville for the draft to help understand operationally how do you put together a draft. So you'll have more of an experience over that 3-4 day period or 1 week period than you would a 10-week period of just learning and working on a group project. So an experience-ship, you're diving more into the work for a short period of time, and then it's just creating more value. I mean, ideally you want to have both, but that's why we had to separate an experience-ship versus an internship.
Wonderful. And someone says, cheers, Roman, from your friends at the Cameroon American Council. Hello. Someone says, HBUs have a really difficult time attracting strong academic students as well. The competition is still stiff, even though they are seeing an uptick in enrollment. I guess that was more of a statement to what someone had said.
Was that Crystal or Carmela? I mean, I don't know if you guys have seen that a lot of students just financially get better packages to go to, what is called PWIs, if you will, versus, so sometimes it becomes a financial decision from terms of what I've seen. I don't know if you guys have seen anything differently.
Sure, the scholarship offerings, certain schools, HBCUs, they struggle with their accreditation, and students are aware of that even before they're athletes, they're first students, because they've got to have something that they're falling back on when their career is over. And while the NFL has great programs to help prepare their athletes for life after their career, not every major league sports organization has that. And so in that, they're looking for a school that's maintaining their accreditation, or a school that has the scholarship money to give them so that they don't have the debt when they decide to move on to their career. So from what I've seen, it's definitely a financial thing. But again, seeing corporations build meaningful partnerships with HBCUs has made all the difference, and just in providing them the resources that they need sometimes to maintain sometimes accreditation comes down to you need just updated facilities. And it makes a difference for programs like nursing and things like that you need up-to-date technology. So that partnership with corporations makes a really big difference for HBCUs.
And then someone said that they really love your point of courageous conversations. And I couldn't agree more. I wrote that down also. And I really think that is it as far as questions. I just see a lot of affirmation. People love the panel, so many great takeaways. You covered so much in such a little time. Thank you very much. So I think that's it. This was such a good conversation. Let me see if I can bring everybody back on. Brian and let's see here.
Now, while Radia is doing that, Ray, I would love to hear just, you've worked very personally and closely with leaders within the financial space. What do you believe you've seen as a common thread for financial leaders who really do commit to diversity, equity, and inclusion?
I think one thing that they do really well up top is, and I've seen this for a long time, is make the business case. You know, the research shows that diverse groups make better decisions, that companies with diverse boards outperform those other boards, their peers. You know, those are really, you would think, just knowing those things, you would think that all of corporate America and financial America would diversify based on just knowing that. But I think more recently, what we've learned is it takes more than the business case. It takes what Roman was talking about, that people want to feel good about working in the organizations where they work, that they want meaning in their work. They want to be proud of their organizations, and they want to know that their organizations are working to improve their communities, not just for their employees, but for their customers, for the public investors that they have, for the general public. So I think that's the other side of the equation that now people are bringing to the fore.
Thank you. And Carmela, I would love for you to share a little bit more about the Diversity Action Alliance with our audience and how they can engage and support the work that you're doing.
Sure. The Diversity Action Alliance is specifically for the PR and corporate communications sector. It is a pledge organization, so it is an organization to which you sign a commitment, and we pride ourselves on holding our signatories accountable. Our signatories are typically agencies, CEOs for PR firms, or chief communications officers, those who are leading academic departments that are in communications. And we provide resources. We're a clearinghouse of resources. We do also anonymously, but we do collect data, demographic data, specifically on people of color at organizations at every level of the corporate structure. So we provide resources, but the expectation in return is that you provide your demographic data and that you meet your commitment. And so for any organization that wants to get involved, you can visit us at diversityactionalliance.org. And we have a ton of resources that we are across industries. So from the financial sector to academia, to help templates, tools, toolkits, to help inform DE&I strategies.
That's awesome. Well, we definitely want to thank the Diversity Action Alliance. We want to thank FINRA and the NFL for allowing us to spend an hour of your time today, because you guys provided so many gems to our audience. We are looking to close soon. I will double check in the chat really quickly to see if there are any other unaddressed questions, but it has been an honor to work with everyone here. Thank you to Radia Barnes, our amazing host, the president of NAMIC New York, who provided this platform for us to engage. We want to encourage people, once this video is actually downloaded and saved on YouTube and on the NAMIC social media page, to please like it, share it, comment it. Please engage your leadership as well to watch this, so they can get tips and strategies on how we all can do better, because collectively we can make a dent in what's happening in our society. And I think that is really the mission of the work that we wanted to do here today. We were looking for Penn Pendleton and Brian Cattell to come back on. There's Penn. It's for our closing.
Listen, thank you all for joining us. This has been really, really interesting, and everyone who has commented, the questions and the panelist responses have been great. We hope that this is not going to be the end of this discussion. We hope it's just the beginning. And we would welcome your feedback. And we at CLP are always happy to be a sounding board on specific challenges that you and your organization may face. So we certainly look forward to keeping in touch with you. And thank you very much for joining us, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you so much. Everyone have a great day. Thank you for joining us. Be well.
Thank you, everyone. I think we leave.
Yep.
Okay.